Hey guys, tonight we walk through the stinking alleyways of a medieval tannery district, where the ground squelches with filth and the air stings your eyes long before it reaches your nose. You're barefoot, ankle-deep in animal guts, and your job is, brace yourself, scraping putrefying skin off cow hides with a blunt knife. Your hands are stained yellow, your clothes crusted stiff. You sleep next to barrels of rotting urine. And your career ladder? Well, it's literally coated in dung. This is not a glamorous start. And to be brutally honest, you probably won't survive this. Between the cholera-laced water, the job hazards, and the constant risk of being mistaken for a leper, your odds are worse than a candle in a catapult factory. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is there. I love knowing who else is whispering with me through history's weirdest back doors. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in 14th century Rouen, Normandy, home to snails, sermons, and some truly suspicious soups. You're apprenticed to a tanner named Jahan, who's more boil than man, and whose beard probably violates canon law. You start your day by emptying the chamber pots of your master's family. Yes, they go into the same vats used to soften hides, and then get straight to soaking animal skins in lime and dung stew so potent it could legally qualify as a weapon. But here's the catch: while most kids born into the stench stay here till their lungs give out, you notice things. You start trading scraps of leftover leather to cobblers for old boots, then patch those up and sell them at market. By 16, you've got a hidden stash of coins under a floorboard. By 20, you're known as the boy who always finds extra scraps, which, in street code, means you're the only one smart enough to hoard. Historians still argue whether the Tanners' Guilds intentionally suppressed upward mobility or if it was simply an olfactory defense strategy. Either way, you keep your plans quiet. The thing about dung pits is everyone assumes you're stuck in them. Now, one day, a noble squire passes through your alley on his way to commission a saddle. The squire's boot tears. You pounce. You mend it beautifully, rapidly, and with a bit of decorative braiding. The squire's impressed. You offer him another pair at half price if he returns next week. Fast forward 3 months. You're accidentally bumping into lesser nobles on market day, leaving little samples of your work with embroidered initials. You've hired 2 kids to do your scraping. Your hands are calloused, but your clothes are clean. You're still officially a tanner's apprentice, but your boots are worth more than Jahan's tools. One mainstream fact here: under feudal systems, tradesmen were usually locked into guild hierarchies with very little movement. But in certain towns like Rouen or Ghent, loopholes appeared when war, famine, or plague caused labor shortages. Speaking of plague, when it hits Rouen in 1349, Jahan dies. Horribly, screaming about his eyeballs melting. You miraculously survive, thanks to your habit of sleeping outside the tannery with your stash of coins, far from the infection-breeding heat. Is it luck, a hardened immune system, or the fact that rats found Jahan more appetizing than you? Quirky tidbit: in some French cities, tanners were legally required to live downwind of the main population to protect the air. But you're now living above your own workshop with a window. You don't stop there. You invent a clever strap buckle that adjusts with one hand, perfect for knights who don't want to remove their gauntlets. You name it after a local saint. Sales explode. Suddenly, you're not just a craftsman. You're a supplier to squires, mercenaries, even a bishop or 2. By 1354, you're invited to a feast, not as a servant, as a guest. That night, you sit at the table's edge, sipping weak cider and pretending you know which spoon to use. You glance down at your hands, clean, strong, no longer shaking from lime burns. You're wearing russet wool. You smell faintly of mint, not manure. And across the table, a merchant's daughter is eyeing you the way one might eye an opportunity. You smile. After all, you've come a long way from dung. You wake with a start, not because of screaming or smoke. This isn't the tannery anymore, but because someone's gently rapping at your door with a walking stick carved from polished walnut. You pull on a tunic, now of thick navy wool, not patched linen, and open the door to find an elderly notary holding a scroll sealed with red wax. He bows low, Not the full noble bow, but definitely lower than someone would bow to a former dung boy. Turns out, the Bishop of Rouen has placed an order. 6 pairs of winter riding boots, all to be lined with lamb's fleece and stitched in the bishop's crest. Delivery in 10 days. No delay. No excuses. Your stomach knots, but it's not fear, it's excitement. You've got the leather, the fleece, and 3 apprentices sleeping downstairs. What you don't have is time to mess around. You get to work, fingers flying, each stitch measured not just in thread, but in reputation. Historians still argue whether medieval bishops were genuinely concerned with fashion or simply mimicking the lavish styles of nobility to assert power. Either way, this particular bishop likes his feet warm and his heraldry unmistakable. You cut, so polish. Your best apprentice, Henri, who once stole bread from your window, is now your foreman. You trust him with the final touches while you ride out to negotiate a better fleece price from a shepherd on the outskirts. Barter isn't dead. In fact, it's a daily ritual. You trade 2 pouches of salted fish for 4 bundles of fleece and a hen. The hen's a bonus. She clucks all the way home. Now you need dye deep crimson for the bishop's insignia. A merchant tries to cheat you with watered-out madder. You test it on a scrap. 2 pink. You walk away. 5 stalls down, you find a widow with a bundle of cochineal she got from a passing Flemish trader. Real stuff. You haggle hard. She throws in a small jar of honey for your beautiful eyelashes, which she insists remind her of her 3rd husband. You don't argue. Quirky tidbit. In some medieval markets, it was common to sweeten deals with compliments or mild flirting, especially if it meant moving stock faster before it spoiled. Medieval merchants had game. You ride back as twilight spills gold over the rooftops of Rouen. Bells toll. Children chase each other past carts of onions. Someone's playing a lute badly. You duck inside, pull off your boots, and plunge into final assembly. Thread through fleece, pull tight, not trim. Repeat. Your hands move like dancers, they know the rhythm now. Come the 10th day, your apprentices load the cart. Henri insists on dusting each pair with powdered charcoal to give the leather a matte finish. You glance over his work. Perfect. Maybe better than your own. You let him ride the cart to the cathedral. You follow behind not as a worker but as a witness. And when the bishop's steward lifts the lid and inspects the boots, something strange happens. He nods, then actually smiles. Then brace yourself, he claps. The bishop's seal is applied to your receipt. Payment is confirmed, not in coin, but in kind. 5 sacks of barley, 3 bolts of dyed wool, and, get this, permission to display your family mark above your shop. You never had a family mark. You make one that night. It's a boot with wings. Fast forward 6 months. You're not just making boots. You're making deals. Henry's managing the shop. Your traveling can buy you even a trip to Paris. You bring back new buckle styles, scraps of design from Moorish traders, ideas that haven't yet reached the local guilds. Historians still argue whether peasant-turned-merchants like you were anomalies or silent proof of a class system more flexible than textbooks suggest. But your journey speaks for itself. You send letters to other tradesmen, offer to trade your leather scraps for ink, parchment, silver thread. You open a second shop in a neighboring village. And on Sundays, when the market closes, you drink ale with other merchants. Men who started like you and now wear blue, not brown. One night, while walking home from the tavern, you find Henri outside, nervous. He hands you a pouch. Inside, a broken ring. He found it on a delivery route. You recognize the crest, minor noble family, recently ruined by plague. The ring isn't worth much, but the name? That might be. You investigate, quietly. Turns out, the noble's daughter is alive, living with an aunt. No dowry, no prospects, no marriage offers. Just pride and a very sharp tongue. You meet her, not through a matchmaker, but by accidentally dropping a basket of pears in her aunt's alley. She helps you pick them up. You joke about your slippery hands. She doesn't laugh. Not right away, but she doesn't walk away either. You begin leaving pears weekly, sometimes with honey, sometimes wrapped in silk. She writes you a note. This is ridiculous, but keep doing it. Love doesn't come like a sword fight. It comes like a pebble in your shoe. Persistent, annoying, impossible to ignore. And one day, you realize you haven't stopped smiling since you saw her last. You're no longer just climbing. You're building. The wedding isn't what you imagined. Not that you ever imagined one. Not back in the tannery, anyway. But now, there's bread on every table, a fiddler straining his gut through a smile, and the smell of roasted goose wafting from a borrowed kitchen. You're in the garden of a cousin's cousin, where peas and violets grow in crooked beds. The guests sit on mismatched stools and crates, raising goblets filled with slightly sour wine. And she walks toward you in a gown the color of storm clouds, her eyes set like flint. The priest mumbles the vows, and you both nod like you're agreeing to a bargain. In a way, you are. She takes your hand, not softly, but firmly, like someone grabbing a rope on a sinking ship, and just like that, you're tethered. Historians still argue whether marriages like yours, between merchant and fated noble, were common or cautionary tales. But your guests don't argue. They just dance. You build her a new room above the shop. It leaks, slightly, but she insists it smells better than her aunt's estate. She brings books, actual books, Latin mostly, which you pretend to understand. She reads aloud while you sort leather. You nod at the serious parts and chuckle at the jokes. You only catch every fourth word, but her voice is music. You start a new product line, embroidered slippers. Her idea. You resist at first. Slippers are for lounging. Who lounges? But they sell, especially among merchant wives who like to display wealth with comfort. She even stitches a pair herself, with tiny ivy vines curling along the heel. You keep that pair. Never sell it. A week later, you get an invitation. No, not to a party, to a guild meeting. The Cobblers Guild of Rouen wants to review your recent activities. You expect trouble. Guilds can be vicious, but instead, you're offered a junior position, probationary. You accept, even as you note the tight smiles from old rivals. Quirky fact: some medieval guilds imposed hazing rituals, like polishing a senior's shoes blindfolded or reciting trade prayers backward. Thankfully, Rouen's cobblers keep things simple. You just host a feast and swear loyalty over a carved boot. So you throw a feast. Your wife bakes almond cakes shaped like feet. Henri brews mead. The guild master grunts approval. It's done, you're official. Which also means dues, inspections, and apprentices you don't choose. One arrives the next month. A girl with calloused hands and a stare that could split timber. Her name's Isabeau. She's 16 and silent, but after a week, she outpaces Henri. You wonder, briefly, if she's some noble's illegitimate daughter, placed here to learn trade. Historians still argue whether certain guilds deliberately recruited outcast noblewomen to protect bloodlines. You don't ask, you just teach. Business grows. So does the city. Rouen's streets buzz louder now. You smell garlic and new taxes in the air. A local scribe asks to rent your attic. In exchange, he'll teach you to write your own contracts. You agree. You learn slowly. Your pen trembles like it's afraid of parchment. Your letters look drunk. But you improve. You write your first contract, a deal with a fur trader from Flanders, and your wife hangs it in the shop like it's art. Then one winter, a flood. The river spills its guts across half the city. Your cellar drowns in mud. Orders freeze. Leather spoils. Apprentices scatter. You think it's the end. But your wife, storm gown and all, borrows coin from her aunt's last friend, a cloth merchant with a sharp nose and sharper memory. She negotiates terms you wouldn't dare. And somehow you're afloat again. You rebuild. Drier, smarter. You install shelves higher. You move tanning to the outskirts. You start logging orders in duplicate. The city notices. You're not just surviving, you're anticipating. Then, a letter arrives. Not stamped, not formal, just a folded note with wax smudged by rain. The Duke of Alassa seeks a private cobbler. You read it twice, maybe 3 times. You wonder if it's a prank. But it's not. You travel north, cloak flapping, nerves shredded. His steward meets you at the estate. Gray stone, moss, and guards with faces like broken helmets. The Duke doesn't meet you right away. You wait 3 hours. Then he arrives, wearing fur and boredom. He speaks one sentence. "Make me boots that don't squeak." You nod, swear silently, begin sketching on the back of an old menu. You measure, not just his feet but his gait, his weight, how he sits. You adjust the arch to match his posture. You add thin slits to release air. You oil the soles. A week later you return. He walks. He stops. He walks again. The silence is thick. Then he says, "Good." No praise, no coin. But the steward hands you a token, a carved stone with the Duke's seal. With it, you gain access to every market under his protection. That token? Worth more than gold. You return home. Show it to your wife. She studies it, nods, and then says, "Now we raise our prices." You do raise your prices. Not too much, not yet. Just enough for people to notice. Enough to make them ask, "Why is he charging more?" And when they hear the answer, "He made boots for the Duke of Alassa," they stop asking and start saving. Suddenly, your little shop is no longer just a place for serviceable souls. It's prestige, one cobbled step at a time. You build a new sign, oakwood, painted with vermilion swirls, and a tiny boot no bigger than a walnut. Creaks cheerfully in the breeze. Merchants nod at it as they pass. Some even tip their hats. You've become someone, the artisan whose name slips into wine-soaked gossip at the Guildhall. Historians still argue whether medieval tradesmen could genuinely shift class through skill alone, or if they needed luck, noble blood, or a very good bribe. You suspect it's a little of everything. You certainly didn't get here by just stitching faster. One day, the bishop's steward stops by. He doesn't speak much, just lays a pair of sandals on your bench and says, "More like these, but with dignity." You don't ask questions. You just copy the sandals and add a flourish, 2 gold thread stitches where the strap meets the toe. Apparently, dignity glows faintly in candlelight. By spring, you've hired another apprentice. Not a silent one this time. Her name's Lorette, and she talks with her hands, usually while waving a knife or thread. She also sings, loudly. You consider banning it, but she brings in customers, especially the young knights who pretend to need repairs just to hear her trill. The shop changes shape subtly. More women come. They ask for custom slippers, pointed boots, even walking heels. Your wife starts keeping sketches in a ledger, each labeled with initials and measurements. You call it a book of feet. She calls it a portfolio. She always wins these naming battles. Then trouble. A rival opens across the lane. Jacques, a tanner's son turned cobbler, backed by a distant cousin of the mayor. He's all polish and pretense. His shop windows draped in imported silk and his apprentices wearing matching blue caps. He undercuts your prices by half and offers free polish with every pair. You don't panic. Not outwardly. Inwardly, though, it's all crumbling loaves and missed heartbeats. But then you remember something. Nobles hate waiting. So you introduce the 3-day promise. If it's not done in 3 days, it's free. Risky? Yes, but doable. You work longer, eat later, sleep less. You finish orders with your eyes half closed and your fingers blistered. But you finish, and word spreads. The mayor's cousin starts buying from you. Quietly, of course, under a different name. He pretends to be someone else when he picks up his order. But your wife clocks him instantly and adds an extra pair of silk-lined boots. For free. Not as a gift, as a warning. Quirky fact. Some medieval artisans included secret marks in their work. Tiny initials, crooked stitches, or thumbprints pressed into seams. You do that now. Not for pride. For proof. Jacques lasts 6 months. Then his shop shutters quietly one rainy morning. You see him once more years later, selling buckles from a cart. He doesn't recognize you. You don't say anything. Then comes the fair. Not just any fair, the Rouen Midwinter Fair. A market so grand it swells the city with foreigners, thieves, and fortune-tellers. It's the one time of year when even the Duke walks among commoners, albeit with guards like shadows. Your booth sits near the center aisle, flanked by 2 fruit sellers and an apothecary who insists snails cure melancholy. You build a simple display. Shoes stacked in pyramids, your sign freshly painted, your apprentices dressed in matching indigo smocks. It's chaos, of course, but good chaos. And then, without warning, the Queen's steward approaches. He says only, "Her Majesty saw a pair of your shoes." That's it. No greeting, no smile. Just a statement and a request. "Can you come to the palace?" You nod, then forget how to breathe. Historians still argue whether royal commissions were rewards or burdens. Some artisans flourished. Others lost everything trying to impress perfection. You decide to keep your head down, your tools sharp, and your designs simpler than you'd like. The palace smells of roses and power. You walk past paintings that could pay your rent for a year, and tapestries woven with gold. You are ushered, not welcomed, ushered, into a room filled with pillows, mirrors, and one very bored queen. She tries on 3 pairs before nodding once. That's the closest thing to joy you see in her face. Then she dismisses you with a flick of her ringed hand. But the steward lingers. He pays in advance. Double. Back home, your wife reads the receipt twice. Then she locks it in a box under your bed. "In case we ever doubt ourselves," she says. That night you dream of shoes. Not just yours, but ones from Persia, from Florence, from kingdoms you'll never visit. You wake with a strange idea. What if you design something entirely new? So you do it, you design something new. You begin with sketches on scrap parchment. A slipper with the toe curled like a fiddlehead fern. A boot with a foldable cuff. A heel not too high, just enough to lift. Nothing gaudy, just strange enough that no one can look away. Your wife raises an eyebrow. "You're not making shoes anymore," she says, tapping the sketch. "You're making ideas." She's not wrong. The first prototypes don't go well. One collapses at the arch. Another squeaks. The curled toe on one gets stuck under a stool and nearly causes an apprentice to break her neck. But slowly, surely, they improve. You test them on your most daring clients. A merchant's wife who always wants something Florentine. A knight who's half-blind and thinks fashion is armor for peasants. And Laurette, your ever-singing apprentice, who wears the curled slipper and declares, "I feel like a fox," catches on, especially with the young. Suddenly, you're not just a cobbler. Juri of a hooner. A word people whisper and say with reverence or mockery depending on how well their old shoes are selling. You host a little gathering at your shop, just clients, apprentices, a local bard. Everyone drinks mulled wine and pretends not to gossip. You present your latest designs by candlelight, each pair revealed like a relic. And there's clapping. Real clapping. Someone shouts, "Where did this come from?" And without missing a beat, your wife says, "From dirt, just like us." Historians still argue whether medieval fashion innovation was born from necessity or vanity. You say both. You wanted to be noticed and to survive. The local guild master, of course, is not amused. He sends a formal summons. Your work diverges from traditional forms, which is the polite way of saying, "Stop it before we fine you." You attend their meeting anyway. Bring the fanciest shoe you've made. Place it on the table and say, "It holds up." They inspect it, prod it, sniff it, for some reason. And then the oldest member leans forward and says, "If we can't stop you, we may as well learn from you." And just like that, you're in. But success isn't safe. That's the thing they never tell you. Your apprentices start getting offers from other shops. One is poached by a tanner who promises a share of profits. Another steals a design and tries to set up shop a town over. You hear about it when a traveler returns wearing your slipper, except the toe curls the wrong way, and the seam is uneven. You laugh. Then you stop laughing, because imitation means you're a target now. You start locking your sketches, training fewer apprentices, vetting your clients more carefully. You become what you once hated, cautious. But then the king's cousin, yes, that cousin, places an order for wedding boots. Ivory-dyed leather, velvet trim, silver buckles. A rush job, due in 3 days. You want to say no. Your hands are swollen. Your apprentices are distracted. Your dog keeps chewing your pattern blocks. But you say yes. You work through the night. Not just because you must, but because something in you still wants to. You remember those early days, the cold mornings, the ache in your back from lifting hides, the way a single coin felt like a victory. You stitch that memory into every seam. And when the cousin arrives, unshaven, red-eyed, muttering about lilies and ceremony, you hand him the boots. He doesn't look at them, just drops a velvet pouch on your table and leaves. Inside, more gold than you've ever seen. Quirky tidbit: gold coins in medieval Europe often varied slightly in weight and composition. You test yours by biting one, just because you've seen nobles do it. It hurts your tooth. You laugh anyway, and then you realize something terrifying. You're rich. Not royal rich, but replace the roof by a cow, feed 3 beggars rich. Your neighbors start looking at you differently. Some admire you, some mutter. You don't care. You build a second floor, install a window, let the light in. You even start painting your shoes. One day, a wandering friar stops by. He looks around your shop, eyes your curved toe slipper, and mutters, "Pride is the slipperiest sin." You nod politely, hand him a pair of plain sandals and say, "For you, free." He accepts them, then blesses your cat. The world grows stranger, richer, louder, but you remain grounded. You still wake early. You still sweep the floor. You still thank your tools at the end of each day, quietly, so no one hears. Historians still argue whether artisans like you reshaped medieval cities from the ground up. You're not sure, but you do know that one winter morning, a noblewoman rode past your shop, pointed at a pair of blue-stitched boots in the window, and said, "That's the future," and you believed her. The spring when the letter arrives. Thick paper, pressed seal, the unmistakable scent of jasmine ink. Because of course nobles need their letters to smell like gardens. Your name is spelled wrong, naturally, but the offer is clear. Travel to court and design footwear for the seasonal tourney. Paid lodging. Meals included. Exposure guaranteed. Your wife reads it twice, then raises one eyebrow. "They want you to perform," she says, as if the word itself were contagious. And she's right. This isn't just about shoes anymore. The journey to court is long and muddy. You share a cart with a goose merchant who insists on humming dirges. The roads are rutted, the bridges sag, and your knees threaten to unionize. But when the castle finally appears over the hills, gray stone, banners flapping like impatient hands, you feel it, that strange, stupid thrill. You're announced at the gates. A boy in livery mispronounces your name again. You don't correct him. Too tired. Too odd. Inside, it's another planet. Polished floors. Tapestries with lions doing acrobatics. Candles in silver chandeliers that look like upside-down trees. And the people, so clean, so perfumed, so incredibly bored. You're given a corner in the servants' wing. A workbench. 3 assistants, each more decorative than useful. One actually gasps when she sees your hands. "You make things?" You nod. She blinks. "That's horrifying." Your job. Design 6 pairs of ceremonial boots for the knights competing in the tourney. Each must represent a different virtue. Honor, loyalty, courage, mercy, piety, and love. You stare at your workbench. Do virtues even have colors? Apparently yes. A steward hands you a chart. Honor is gold. Courage is red. Love is lilac. You don't argue. You sketch. You stitch. You swear quietly when the thread knots. One morning, you find that a mouse has eaten part of the boot labeled piety. No one finds this funny except the jester, who now calls you the shoemaker of sin. Still, the boots turn out beautiful. Clean lines, symbolic flourishes, hidden stitching so fine it could pass for magic. Even the goose merchant, who shows up uninvited, says, "Never seen a boot make a man look braver than his face." Mainstream historical fact: royal courts often employed artisans not just for their skills, but as status symbols themselves, living proof of the ruler's refined taste. You deliver the boots to the armory. The knights nod. One actually says, "Thanks." You pretend not to swoon. Then someone taps your shoulder. Tall man, hooded, smiling without humor. His Grace wishes to see you. You panic. Did you offend someone? Misstitch a cross? Mix up love and loyalty? You're led through twisting corridors to a small garden. Ivy, gravel, a single stone bench. Sitting on it, the Duke himself. Not the king, but close. Richer than you'll ever be. His boots, you note, are cracked, scuffed, pitiful. He gestures. Sit. You do, heart thumping. I heard about your designs, he says. They tell stories. I need one. You wait. My daughter is marrying a boar. He says it plainly. We can't stop it, but we can distract from it. She'll walk into that church wearing something no one's ever seen before. You hesitate. Shoes? No, he says. Hope. It's a ridiculous brief. But you nod. You get to work. The bridal slippers you make are pale blue, like sky before thunder. Silver thread arcs like stars across the toes. Tiny bells hide in the seams, silent when still, whispering when she walks. You line them with rabbit fur, because even a duchess should feel softness when stepping into her cage. Fringe tidbit? Bells on bridal wear weren't just decorative. Some believed they warded off evil spirits, or, in this case, obnoxious husbands. The day of the wedding, the courtyard floods with velvet and lace. Musicians tune their instruments. A roast peacock glares at you from a platter. And there she is, the bride. Eyes dry, face blank, until she sees the slippers. And for a moment, just one. She smiles. Historians still argue whether such small moments, like a whispered smile or a pair of blue shoes, ever mattered in the grand sweep of medieval power. But here, now, under the shadow of stone walls and family politics, it matters. The wedding goes on. People clap. The groom looks pleased with himself. You avoid his gaze. That night, a servant slips a note under your door. 3 words. She danced later. You don't sleep, not because of nerves, but because something in you feels full. You return home richer, not in coin, they barely paid you, but in stories. Your wife listens to every word. Then she laughs. You always come back weirder. You grin. They made me royal. She scoffs. You still snore. You go back to work. You make boots for children who outgrow them in a month. Slippers for old women with crooked feet. Sandals for pilgrims who never tip. You keep the sketches from the wedding, though, tucked in a drawer, just in case someone asks, have you ever made something that changed everything? You can say, yes. Autumn hits like a sermon. The leaves turn blood orange and gold. The air carries that damp kind of cold that lives in your sleeves, and everyone starts talking about death again. Church bells ring more often. Markets grow quieter. The village priest preaches twice as long, just in case God's listening a little more closely this time of year. But for you, it's peak season. Boots split on frost-hardened roads. Soles peel off in the morning dew. Your workshop becomes a sanctuary of leather, wax, and the warm stink of tannins. Then she walks in, not in a dramatic swirl of wind and mystery, just quietly brushing leaves from her cloak. Her hair is braided, simple. Her hands, rough. Her boots, catastrophic. I heard you fix things, she says, placing them on your table. You nod. Sometimes. She raises an eyebrow. Do they walk better afterward? Usually. You don't ask her name. She doesn't offer it. But she returns a week later with another pair. Then again. Over time, it becomes a rhythm. She brings broken shoes, and you stitch quietly beside her, trading stories. Not the flashy kind, but the ones that slip out by accident. Like how she sings to her sheep, or how you once tried to wax your mustache and set your nose on fire. She laughs at that one, snorts actually. A rare sound, like a church bell ringing on a Tuesday. You learn she lives on the edge of the village. Alone. Not because she has to, but because the world's quieter that way. She says she used to want a bigger life, but now she just wants to sleep through the night without her roof leaking. Mainstream historical fact? In medieval Europe, many women remained single or widowed by choice, managing land or trades in ways that defied later stereotypes of helpless housewives. She brings you a carved button one day. It fell off a coat, she says. Can you make it stay? You nod, but your fingers linger on the fabric. The coat isn't hers, and the thought hits you heavier than it should. She's seeing someone. Fringe tidbit? In small villages, buttons and pins were often reused or gifted romantically. More than one betrothal started with "I fixed your tunic." You try not to care. Really, you're a bootmaker, not a ballad. But you do start brushing your hair more. You even try singing once under your breath. She doesn't notice. One afternoon, she doesn't come. Then two. Then a week. You ask the goose merchant. He shrugs. Heard she left. Something about a brother. You nod. Keep your face still. Historians still argue whether romantic attachment played any measurable role in medieval village cohesion, but it certainly ruined your appetite. You keep working, keep stitching, but the shop feels colder now. Then winter comes. Early, angry. You're repairing sled shoes and goat blankets when the door bursts open. It's her. Her cheeks are red with wind, and her hands shake from the cold. She holds out something wrapped in wool. "It's my brother's," she says. "His wedding's in 3 days." You take the bundle. She lingers. "He's marrying up," she says. "Her family owns 2 vineyards and a half church." You nod. "Impressive." She looks at your workbench. "Still fixing everything?" You gesture at a particularly tragic slipper. "Trying." She watches you stitch. Then quietly, "He didn't want the coat." You pause. "The one with the button," she clarifies. You don't say anything. Just tie off the thread. She exhales. "So I kept it." Silence. Then, "You're not very good at flirting." You blink. "That's fair." She smiles. "Luckily, I am." And just like that, your shop is warm again. Not because of the fire, but because she starts staying longer. Talking more. Bringing bread. Once, she even hums while sweeping your floor. You offer her a pair of slippers lined with rabbit fur. She rolls her eyes. "You're wooing me with warm feet? Is it working?" She shrugs. "A little." She starts wearing them everywhere. And you? You stop checking the door every 5 minutes. Instead, you start making plans. Not big ones, just small, stubborn ones. Like extending the workshop, or adding a second hook by the fire, or planting herbs in the spring. You don't talk about marriage. Not yet. But one morning, she says, "If I built a new roof, would you help me?" You nod. "Only if I get naming rights." She considers. "Fine. We'll call it Not Leaky." You grin. "It's perfect." Snow blankets the village in silence. Everything slows, markets, gossip, even the hens. But your days remain steady, marked by the soft rhythm of stitches, the hiss of steam against hide, and the faint humming of a woman who now sweeps your floor like she's always been there. Your boots get better. Her stews get spicier. And together, you carve out a life that's quiet but full, like a candlelit chapel at dusk. One morning, she brings you a wooden spoon. Not for cooking, but carved with a heart at the handle and your initials scratched awkwardly into the bowl. "It's hideous," she warns, "but it's yours." You display it proudly, right next to your favorite awl. Mainstream historical fact? Medieval couples often exchanged handmade tokens long before official betrothals. Rings were rare, carved spoons and ribbons were the true love language of the peasantry. You build her a footrest. She sews you a scarf. Love, it seems, is mostly practical. But just when the snow starts to melt and the first daffodils peek through the dirt, trouble arrives in the form of a tax collector. He's dressed in layers too fine for mud and rides a horse that clearly hates him. His boots are spotless. His gaze, less so. "Evictions," he announces to the gathered crowd. The monastery is reclaiming its land. Half of this village isn't paying enough to justify the parchment. People whisper. You look at her. She looks at the sky. Fringe tidbit? Monasteries across Europe were both landlords and lenders. They held spiritual authority with one hand and rent contracts with the other, perfect for funding church towers and toppling rural love stories. Your cottage sits just inside the disputed boundary. Hers just outside. You have 2 weeks. You think about fighting it. You draft a petition with the priest. It gets laughed out of the council hall before the ink dries. She packs neatly. You don't. Your hearth goes cold. The footrest looks absurdly empty. You wear her scarf every day, even when it's warm. She moves 3 villages over to her cousin's mill. You visit once, awkward, brief, heavy. She shows you the flour press. You pretend to be fascinated. Historians still argue whether peasant relocation disrupted long-term family stability or simply reshuffled an already fractured system. But you know this. She left, and you stayed, and that's all that matters. Spring becomes summer. You fix boots. You fix belts. You fix your roof alone. And one day the wooden spoon snaps. You stare at the pieces in your hand longer than you should. Then you do something ridiculous. You take a week off work. First time in years. You stitch together a pair of boots made from the finest leather you've ever touched. Lined with wool. Reinforced at the toe. Small enough for her. You walk to her village. Takes 3 days. Your feet blister. You get chased by one extremely territorial goose. Twice. But you arrive. The mill is loud, dusty, and smells like raw bread dough and disappointment. She sees you. She doesn't speak. You offer the boots. They're not much, you say, but they won't fall apart. She takes them, turns them over in her hands. You walked 3 days. Technically 4, you admit. Geese are fast. She laughs short, surprised. Then she hugs you. Mainstream historical fact? Despite feudal constraints, peasant marriages often began not in church but in moments like these: public affection, shared belongings, and mutual declarations in front of witnesses. You eat dinner with her family that night. It's chaotic and crowded. You spill soup on your tunic and a toddler bites your thumb. It's perfect. When you leave, she walks with you to the edge of the village. "Don't wait for me," she says softly. "I'm not good at waiting," you reply. "But I'm worse at forgetting." She nods. "I'm trying to come back. I'm trying to make it worth it." She looks at you like she wants to say more, but instead, she just presses the boots to her chest. And you walk home, blistered, hopeful, and somehow lighter. You wake the next morning sore, sunburned, and utterly convinced it was all a dream, until you roll over and see the second spoon. She must have tucked it into your pack without saying a word. It's smoother than the first. The initials are better carved. There's a little notch at the base of the handle. Something only you would notice. A signature, maybe. Promise. You don't put it on display this time. You keep it in your pocket. Summer in the village has never felt so alive. Children run barefoot through the rye. The church bell rings so often it starts sounding like a song. And you become something of a legend. They call you the boot whisperer. The boy who made shoes that walked love back into town. The lad who tamed the goose. Your clientele grows. Nobles from nearby estates send their servants with requests for that craftsman who sews emotion into his seams. One even asks if you can stitch family crests into a pair of hunting boots. You try. You fail. You lie and say it was a design choice. Mainstream historical fact? As medieval trade routes expanded and urbanization rose, even humble artisans could gain regional reputations, especially those whose skills catered to both function and symbolism. And love, it turns out, is the best advertising. You start receiving letters, sloppily written, sealed with wax, stained with travel. Some ask for apprenticeships. Some ask for advice. One asks if you're the poet who makes boots. You write back to none of them except one. The letter is from her. Short, barely a paragraph. But it's enough. Harvest is nearly over. I miss the noise of your tools. The silence here bites. I hope your stitching is still crooked. She signs it with a little sketch of a boot. No initials. Just the boot. You sit with it for an hour. You don't reply. Instead, you start sewing. The next day, you meet with the village blacksmith. You trade a dozen repaired saws for 3 hours of his time. Together, you draft something absurd. A cart with a folding bench, shaded top, and space for 2 people to sit without touching knees unless they wanted to. You call it a traveling bench. He calls it a mistake. You tow it, half-finished, to the field beyond your house. That night, under a sky spangled with more stars than sadness, you dream of her sitting in it. Face tilted to the wind, eyes closed, the road wide and full of maybe. Fringe tidbit: medieval wagons and carts were rarely made for comfort, mostly for hauling grain, firewood, or bodies. The idea of a leisure bench on wheels would have been laughable, unless, of course, someone fell in love with the idea of moving together. You keep building. Days stretch long, but so does your resolve. Meanwhile, your neighbor's daughter brings you bread. She watches you hammer, sand, swear softly when you split a wheel rim. She's quiet but bright-eyed. And when she finally asks, "Is it for a girl?" you nod. She doesn't ask which one. A week later, you receive another letter. It's frantic. The mill's owner is selling. "I have a fortnight. I don't know where to go." This time, you don't think. You hitch your cart to the neighbor's ox, the one who hates eye contact, and begin your second journey. Historians still argue whether mobility during the Middle Ages increased romantic agency among peasants or simply exposed them to more heartbreak across larger distances. You, at this moment, are arguing with a very stubborn ox. But in principle, you'd say yes. It changes everything. The journey takes 2 days less this time. You don't rest. You eat cheese straight from your pocket and sleep with your boots on. When you arrive, she's already packed. Your cart pulls into view like a creaking love song. The ox grunts. She blinks. "You actually brought it," she whispers. "It doesn't handle corners well," you say. "But it handles you just fine." She climbs in. You sit beside her. The ox doesn't move for a solid hour, but neither do you. Eventually, the wind picks up. The road opens, and you roll forward. It's not the fastest escape in history, but it's the most meaningful one you've ever taken. You camp by a stream that night, near a bend where the water sounds like gentle laughter. She sleeps wrapped in your old cloak, her back to you but not too far away. You, meanwhile, lie awake, staring at the stars like they owe you something, answers maybe, or just a little warmth. The cart squeaks with every breeze. The ox snores like a distant drum roll, and you think, what now? Because nobody tells you what to do after the big gesture. The stories always stop at the kiss, the rescue, the triumphant return. But real life is awkward silences, communal foot blisters, and a shared chunk of stale bread that tastes oddly like optimism. The next day, you arrive in a town that neither of you recognizes. It's quiet but not unfriendly. There's a market square, a well that smells faintly of mint, and a chapel with a crooked bell tower that looks like it's been drunk since Easter. She wants to keep moving. You want to stop. So, naturally, you stay. For now. Mainstream historical fact: many medieval peasants who left their home villages, whether for love, famine, or exile, ended up as day laborers in unfamiliar towns, often blending into local economies through skills like cobbling, spinning, or blacksmithing. You find work at the tannery. It's disgusting, smells like wet sin, and pays in goat meat and brownish coins. But it's something. She takes up washing linens at the apothecary. Not glamorous, but she gets to smell rosemary and sage all day, which beats boiled cowhide by a mile. At night, you sit on your cart, your ridiculous, lovely cart, and talk. Not always about important things. Sometimes it's about soup, or the price of eggs, or why oxen always look disappointed in humans. But sometimes it's about what comes next. She wants to buy a small plot, build a cottage with wide windows. You imagine a tiny workshop beside it, the walls filled with shelves of imperfect boots, and a drawer full of spoons, each one carved a little better than the last. Fringe tidbit: some medieval lovers who ran away together did eventually marry and settle, especially if they found sympathetic local clergy. However, many were never formally wed, instead living in what modern scholars call marital cohabitation without ecclesiastical oversight, which is just a fancy way of saying they shacked up. You don't talk about marriage. But one evening, she hands you something wrapped in linen. It's your spoon, the one you carved way back when your heart was all elbows and guesswork. She kept it, cleaned it, smoothed the edges. "I want this one," she says. You don't answer. Instead, you take out your second spoon, the one she carved, and place it beside hers. 2 spoons. 1 story. Historians still argue whether material tokens of affection, like carved utensils, woven belts, or embroidered sleeves, held contractual romantic meaning, or were just sentimental keepsakes. For you, they're more binding than any scroll. The seasons shift. Autumn sneaks in with copper leaves and colder mornings. Your hands crack. Her nose runs constantly. You both complain loudly and often, but neither of you leaves. The ox becomes something of a local mascot. Children feed it turnips. Someone knits it a scarf. One night, while you're fixing a busted axle, she asks, "If we stayed here forever, would that be enough?" You don't answer right away. You finish hammering, wipe your hands, and say, "As long as I don't have to eat goat meat forever." She laughs. That laugh, sharp, sudden, completely hers, makes the night feel less cold. So you build, not just the cart, not just boots. You build a bench outside your shared room, a coat hook shaped like a crooked spoon, a hearth shelf that only fits 2 mugs. Exactly. And slowly, townfolk start calling you his and hers, as if you're one name, one legend, like a stitched seam that never quite breaks. But beneath all this comfort, all this slow joy, there's a tremor. Because good things, especially for peasants, rarely last. The miller's son grows jealous. He wanted her once, still does maybe. He spreads whispers that you're not really wed, that she's a runaway, that your ox is cursed. That part might actually be true. And the priest? He starts asking questions about legitimacy, about God's will, about what sort of woman refuses the chapel, but wears a man's boots at dawn. You try to ignore it, but some glares you can't unsee, some rumors you can't unhear, and some choices, well, they'll come for you whether you make them or not. You sharpen your blade by moonlight now, not because you plan to use it, but because the act feels reassuring, controlled, predictable. The whetstone sings a quiet rhythm, one that blocks out the murmurs from the chapel steps and the suspicious glances at the well. She senses it too. Her laughter has dimmed a little, the edges of her cheerfulness clipped short like a garden hedge before winter. She still smiles, still stirs stew like it's a sacred ritual, but there's a weight behind her eyes. A waiting. It starts with a parchment, a summons, official, wax-sealed, overly folded like a note passed in a classroom. The town bailiff wants a word. Nothing threatening, of course, just a discussion on property, on public standing, on faith. You know what that means. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval towns, especially those growing in population and commerce, often regulated cohabitation and required either formal marriage or legal separation for couples living together without church approval. Failure to comply could result in public shaming, fines, or exile. So you show up, sleeves rolled, boots scrubbed, ox tethered outside like some reluctant chaperone. The bailiff smiles too wide, offers bread that's too stale, speaks too slowly. They want you married, not just handfasted in the eyes of affection. As the poets say, they mean documented, witnessed, chanted over, married. Preferably in the chapel, in front of the townspeople, with vows and saints and all the usual incense. You hesitate, not because you don't want it, but because you know this isn't about love. It's about order, control, making sure every heart beats in rhythm with the parish bell. You leave with the deadline, a month. If not, your status will be revoked. You'll be seen as squatters. She may lose her job. The cart, technically on church land, could be claimed. The ox too. Poor guy. Fringe tidbit. In parts of rural France and the Low Countries, local legends tell of marriage spies. Unofficial agents who reported unmarried couples to village elders or priests, often for a reward of bread, ale, or favor. Back home, if you can still call it that. She's already heard. She's sitting on the bench you built, the one just wide enough for 2 elbows and a hopeful breeze. She looks up, eyes unreadable. "I won't wear a veil," she says. You nod. "I won't kneel," she adds. You nod again. "I won't pretend I'm someone else to please a man in a robe." You smile. Good, because neither will I. You craft your own ceremony. Under an elm tree, the twilight, no priest, no choir, just 2 spoons, a circle of stones, and the ox standing witness like some hairy best man. You speak vows carved from everyday things, like porridge and frost and the way she breathes in her sleep. She promises to never steal your tools. You promise to always taste her stews, even when they're suspiciously gray. Historians still argue whether irregular unions, like these, were tolerated by local customs or whether they faced automatic ecclesiastical persecution. Some regions recorded such partnerships as valid if publicly acknowledged and consistent over time. The next day you tell the bailiff, "We've wed, in spirit and in truth, just not in your house." He's unimpressed. So the gossip begins again. They say she bewitches you, that your ox talks in dreams, that you carved her likeness into your boots. You didn't, but now you kind of want to. Things grow colder, literally and figuratively. Winter approaches like a guest who doesn't knock. You chop more wood, stock more stew. She patches every hole in your shared roof, then in your shared coat, then in your shared resolve. Still, the town stares. One morning, someone throws dung at your door. Another day, a child spits as you pass. By week's end, there's a notice tacked to your cart. Unblessed, unbound, unfit, framed in rusty nails. You take it down slowly. You don't yell. Don't march to the chapel with a blade. You just look at her. And she says, "Let's leave." Just like that. No tears. No drama. Just 2 spoons, 1 ox, and everything you've built packed into a single cart again. This time, the leaving feels heavier. Because it's not escape, it's rejection. But even then, you leave together. And that still counts for something. You don't head for the forest this time. You've learned. The wild might cradle the soul, but it doesn't feed the stomach or warm the bones come January. Instead, you steer the ox toward the next village over a few miles by foot, but it feels like crossing into another kingdom. She walks beside you, not behind, and the cart creaks with a strange new confidence, as if it knows it's carrying more than just pots and planks. It's carrying a future. The village smells of iron and yeast. There's a smithy, a brewery, and, miraculously, a midwife who doesn't flinch at your accent. No one recognizes your face. No one spits. You rent a corner of a stable, just enough space to sleep beside the ox. He doesn't mind. She finds work the next day, kneading dough in a bakehouse where the air is warm and always dusted with flour. You land a job repairing the wattle fence outside a pig yard. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. And this time, you're not pretending to be someone else. Mainstream historical fact: many medieval peasants displaced by feudal disputes or ecclesiastical pressures migrated from village to village, offering labor and skills in exchange for housing and protection under different lords or guilds. There's no ceremony, no second honeymoon. Just routine, delicious, dependable routine. You wake with straw in your hair, trade chores, pass each other cups of water like communion. Her hands are always red from dough. Yours are calloused from rope. But neither of you complains. And then comes the spring fair, a once-a-year event. Cloaks flutter like banners. Flutes sing through the streets. Someone juggles turnips. And yes, there's a man selling roasted squirrels on sticks. You politely decline. She tugs your sleeve toward the main tent. Dancing. You hesitate. You've got 2 left feet, 1 bad knee, and the grace of a mule in mud. But she's already swaying. So you join her. Badly. The rhythm trips you up. Your feet betray you. You nearly elbow an old lady carrying honeycomb. But she laughs, your wife, not the old lady. And it's the kind of laugh that stitches time together like thread through linen. And for a second, you're young again. Not in years, but in spirit. Unwatched. Unjudged. Fringe tidbit. In some medieval English fairs, couples would perform public dances or exchange symbolic gifts, such as garters or woven bracelets, as informal acts of courtship or repledging their commitment. These weren't legally binding but were often respected by the community. Historians still argue whether festivals served more as moral release valves or subtle tools of social cohesion. Were they truly joyous peasant celebrations, or carefully orchestrated distractions by lords and churches to maintain control? You don't know. You don't care. That night, she presses a ribbon into your palm. Teal, frayed at the edge, smelling faintly of bread. You ask, "What's this for?" She shrugs. "To remind you that you chose me." Even when it wasn't easy. You don't wear it. You carry it. Tied around your wrist sometimes. Tucked behind your belt other times. Once, wrapped around your ankle during a particularly long walk to market. Life becomes quieter. No epic dramas. No chapel condemnations. Just mornings of dew and evenings of shared crusts. You build her a chair. She carves your name into the underside. You both forget the exact date of your vows. But remember the smell of the tree you stood under. The ox gets older. So do you. There are whispers that the town may open a school. She mentions, casually, that she might want to learn her letters. You promise to build her a stool for sitting properly, even though she always sits sideways with one leg over the other. Years pass like a river you don't realize you're crossing until you look back and can't see the bank you started from. And one day, just a regular, nothing special day, you realize something strange. You're happy. Not in the way minstrels sing about. Not with fanfare or flame. But in the way a door closes softly, or a cat purrs at your feet, or someone hums a tune that has no beginning and no end. You survived. Together. And for peasants, that's its own kind of miracle. You never meant to own anything again. Land? Out of reach. Wealth? A joke. Legacy? Laughable. But the man with the crooked teeth at the edge of the village, he owed your wife a favor. She helped birth his twins during a thunderstorm when the midwife was too drunk to stand. So now, you're the proud caretaker of a narrow strip of earth wedged between a barley field and a ditch full of frogs. Technically, it's his. But he lets you till it, fence it, and plant whatever you want as long as he gets a pumpkin or two by autumn. It's not much, but it feels enormous. Your own plot. Your own seeds. Your own dirt under the nails. You kneel beside the furrows one morning and feel like you've been given a second name. Not just survivor. Not just wanderer. But grower. She joins you after her baking shift. Still flowered. Still radiant. Together you plant fava beans. Lentils. A few rows of garlic. Even though the village priest mutters that too much garlic leads to marital indiscretion. You plant more. Mainstream historical fact. Landless peasants in the later Middle Ages often became sharecroppers or leaseholders under informal verbal agreements, trading labor or a portion of their crops for access to small strips of usable land. You don't own the land, but it starts to feel like it owns you, in the best way. Every weed you pull, every seed you press into the loam, it's like placing a bet on tomorrow. One day, she laughs and says, "We should build a scarecrow." So you do. Out of old bread sacks, worn-out boots, and a cap that smells like ale and regret. You name him Lord Featherhead, and give him a crooked stick for a scepter. Some kids throw stones at him. You yell like a madman, pretending he's your cousin visiting from court. The kids run off screaming. She calls you a fool, but she's laughing. Fringe tidbit. Scarecrows in medieval Europe weren't always humanoid. Some villages tied rags to trees or used carved turnip heads to frighten birds. Others hung dead animals, grim but effective. You start trading. Beans for candles. Garlic for buttons. Once you swap a turnip for a story. A woodcutter's tale of wolves dancing in the snow. Completely ridiculous. But it sticks with you, and the village starts calling you by name. Not "Hey you." Not "Baker's husband." Not "that guy with the limp." But your actual name. One syllable. A little blunt. A little muddy. But yours. Historians still argue whether peasant life in the late Middle Ages truly improved, or whether romanticized notions of rural contentment obscure the persistent hardships of disease, taxes, and backbreaking work. Some claim that the loosening of feudal bonds allowed for real social mobility. Others argue it just created new cages. More freedom to starve, more liberty to be forgotten. You don't write that debate down. You just live inside it. There's a moment, quiet, small, forgettable, when you realize she's humming while shelling peas. She used to hum in the other village too, before things collapsed. But back then it was a tense, forced tune. Now it flows. It's the sound of safety. You plant a rose bush near the edge of the strip. It's not for eating. It's not for selling. It's just for color. The first blossom opens on the morning of your third spring. It's red. Not royal red. Not cardinal red. but a warm, almost embarrassed red, like it's not used to being admired. You admire it anyway. You build her a bench, just 2 planks and 4 stumps. But she sits on it like it's a throne. She says, "This is the most peace I've ever known." You don't say anything. You just plant more beans. That night, as the fire flickers and the frogs in the ditch sing a crude lullaby, you trace your fingers along her arm and feel the rhythm of a life no longer stolen, no longer hidden. No nobles, no friars, no riots, just air, bread, and someone who chose to stay. And you realize something else. Even if this all vanished tomorrow, if Lord Featherhead caught fire, if the beans drowned, if the Scarecrow was appointed bishop, you'd still be grateful. Because for the first time, you weren't just surviving. You were remembered, even if only by her. You never expected your love story to be copied. But that's what starts happening. It begins with whispers. The girl who sells onions in the market shyly asks if she can watch you bake. The shepherd boy with a crooked smile starts leaving little pouches of rosemary in the crook of her doorframe. A widow whose heart turned to flint after 2 decades of silence starts wearing color again. Soft greens, like moss, or a shy blue that matches morning light. You don't say a word. You just keep planting, baking, and sometimes kissing her hand like you're in some knight's tale. She rolls her eyes. She kisses you back anyway. Mainstream historical fact. Courtly love, so often tied to the aristocracy, began to influence commoners too by the late Middle Ages, as minstrels, miracle plays, and village storytelling traditions brought tales of Lancelot and Tristan into the ears of shepherds and weavers. But yours isn't courtly. It's flowery. It's muddy. It's real. There's a May Day festival. They crown her queen of blossoms. She laughs so hard she snorts cider through her nose. They drape her in garlands. Someone hands you a broken reed flute and says, "Play!" You wheeze out something resembling music. The goats look offended. She dances anyway, and suddenly the entire village is dancing, badly, joyfully, like their knees forgot they were peasants and thought they were clouds. Fringe tidbit. Some rural May festivals in the 14th and 15th centuries included mock weddings or symbolic rituals where villagers would pair off, for a night or even a summer, guided by ancient fertility rites. It made the clergy nervous. Very nervous. She grabs your hand, pulls you through the mud. You almost trip over Lord Featherhead, who's been redressed in a tunic too fine for a scarecrow. You wonder who's been sneaking clothes onto him. Probably the widow. She always had a thing for nobility. You realize something. This village, this patch of mud, these beans, they don't just belong to you now. You belong to them. They remember when you arrived half-starved. They remember the day you sold your boots for firewood. They remember your first loaf, your second scarecrow, the time you sang off-key in the dark and everyone clapped anyway. Historians still argue whether peasant communities were truly close-knit or if hardship bred suspicion and quiet desperation. Some letters suggest fierce village loyalty. Others, betrayals over stolen eggs or whispered heresies. But when your neighbor trades her only ribbon for your barley cake, it doesn't feel theoretical. Winter comes again, not as cruel, but still sharp around the edges. You board up the door tighter. You wear mittens she stitched from old tunics. You sleep huddled close, sharing breath and body heat, listening to the wind like it's telling stories no one asked for. One morning you wake up and she's already outside, talking to the frost-covered rose bush. "You made it," she says. The bush doesn't answer, but a single bud has curled its way toward the sun. You know what comes next. The landlord's son visits. Slick boots, silky voice. He offers coin for your land. Claims it's going to be part of a new road or hunting ground or private orchard. You say no. Then he threatens. Not directly, just enough to make you tighten your grip on the hoe. You don't break. Neither does she. And by spring, he's forgotten. Some minor scandal. Off to be punished by his own father for playing lordling in the mud. And your bean rose? Longer. Your garlic? Famous. People come from 2 villages over just to barter for a clove. And her bread? Oh, it wins praise from every toothless grandmother in a 6-mile radius. You even get a cat. It's mangy, smells like fish and resentment, but it purrs like a forge when it curls up next to your hearth. You name it Baron Whiskerford. She pretends to hate the name, then buys it a collar made of old lace. One evening, as you watch her peel apples by candlelight, you whisper, "Marry me again." She says, "What makes you think we ever stopped?" And suddenly, the warmth inside your ribs feels like summer never ended. This isn't wealth. Not in the Lord's books. But if this life were weighed on a scale made of joy, laughter, bread crusts, and muddy kisses, you'd be royalty. The years have a way of slipping through your fingers, like flour dust, like candle wax, like the ribbon she once wore in her hair on a day when the entire field smelled like crushed thyme and rain. You don't notice the seasons turning at first. The wheel just keeps spinning. One harvest fades into another. The road near your farm starts seeing more carts, more cloaks trimmed in fox fur, more children giggling behind their mothers' skirts. A market forms where once there was just grass and gossip. And yet, your days stay mostly the same. The rooster still hates you. The goat still escapes. The cat still acts like royalty and sheds on every surface that was ever meant to be clean. You still wake before dawn, light the oven, knead dough with the kind of focus usually reserved for monks or battlefield surgeons. She joins you after, yawning, hair a soft mess, sleeves already dusted with flour by the time she says her first word. Mainstream historical fact. Though we imagine medieval peasants as dirty, dim, and doomed, the truth is more nuanced. Many lived long, rich lives filled with community, skill, seasonal rhythms, and forms of happiness no tax roll could record. She hums when she works, some old song her grandmother used to sing, about a bird who flew so far it became part of the sky. You don't know the words, just the tune. You whistle it when she's gone to barter cheese with the new blacksmith's wife. She returns with both cheese and a scandal. Guess who got caught skinny dipping again? You guess wrong. It was the priest. Again. Your shoulders hurt more these days. Not badly. Just a tightness like winter lodging in your bones a few weeks too early. You stretch more. She rubs ointment on them. Smells like mint and mystery. Probably something her aunt swore by before being accused of minor sorcery and then promptly cleared. It was only chicken bones, she'd said. And for stew, not spells. Fringe tidbit. Across rural medieval Europe, many wise women or cunning folk were simultaneously sought for cures and feared for curses. The line between healer and heretic was flexible, to say the least. Your village throws a midsummer fair. This year, someone's built a wooden stage. There's a puppet show. The puppets are terrifying. One is definitely modeled after Baron Whiskerford. You pretend not to notice. The children love it. You sneak off with her behind the apple carts. Kiss her like it's still your first May Day. She laughs in your mouth. Says your beard tickles. You remind her she married this beard. She says, "I married the man who forgot to shave for 4 months, not the beard itself." Historians still argue whether peasant marriages were more practical than romantic, shaped by land, dowry, and necessity. But somewhere between the third shared joke and the 17th warm potato, love sneaks in persistent, familiar, tender. Then one day the priest dies, not scandalously, not mid-skinny dip, just quietly while shelling beans in the sun. You and she help dig the grave, not because you have to, because it feels right. And as the village lowers him into the earth, wrapped in wool and wildflowers, someone starts to sing her grandmother's bird song, the one you always whistle. No one says the words, just the tune. The sky listens. You get older, slower. The stairs creak more than you do, barely. She sits more than she runs. But her eyes still flash like firelight on stormy nights. Baron Whiskerford finally retires from his world tour of judgmental glaring. The new kitten, Duchess Biscuit, has taken over. And still, your hands find hers in the dark. Every night. Still. She pulls you close and says, "Remember the scarecrow?" And you both laugh. Because yes, you remember the scarecrow. The mud. The hunger. The first beans. The kiss. The sting of frost and the smell of baking bread. The whispered promises. You remember surviving. But more than that, you remember living.